From military bases surrounding the continent to countries turning their backs on former colonial masters and welcoming anti-Western nations, the future of Africa's geopolitics needs time to sit down and explain. Indeed, ever since Africa's test of independence, the continent has faced numerous geopolitical challenges, including ongoing conflicts, economic instability, and the need to navigate a shifting global landscape. But that seemed to be within the continent, looking at them as matters that Africa is dealing and struggling with. The real deal is with the emerging issues concerning the immense geopolitical shift that the continent is undergoing, that is creating a number of questions. When we talk about African nations turning their backs on their colonial masters, isn't an easy move that can be just overlooked. The African continent may seem just another continent that is underdeveloped compared to other continents, but you shouldn't be fooled by that narrative. When various African countries obtained independence from their masters, it wasn't just a passover of power, but a move that the new and emerging revolutionists plus the Gen Z are questioning whether it was true independence. By plundering Africa's resources and carving it up into artificial states, Europe's colonial powers created vicious cycles of violence, poverty, and authoritarianism that are playing out to this day. This leads us to neocolonialism, a thing that Africans and new revolutionists are crying out about, that it has left the continent into pieces. Neocolonialism, as it is the term that refers to the continued domination of African nations by former colonial powers and other developed nations, even after formal independence. It involves various forms of indirect influence, including economic exploitation, political manipulation, and cultural dominance. Ever since obtaining independence, African nations have been reliant on former colonial powers and developed nations for trade, aid, and investment, often leading to unfair trade practices and debt burdens. That's seeming unfair. The worst thing has been external actors influencing political processes in African nations through aid conditions, military interventions, and support for specific political factions. This has left the continent with corrupt leaders who have not assisted much towards the well-being of their nations at the expense of external actors through neocolonialism. Now new revolutionarists are expelling former colonial masters while simultaneously welcoming anti-Western nations, a thing that is creating tension between West and Eastern powers. Ever since the Sahel immense shift of expulsion of French and US troops, bases and embassies plus media tension continues to rise on and on. Coupled with continuous coup attempts, more geopolitical games are pouring in concerning who really wants to gain geopolitical influence in this region. Not ending in Sahel were President Ibrahim Traore and his colleagues in the Alliance of Sahel States, plus countries like Chad. Different African regions are also saying it is enough with the West. The fight for influence in Africa is rapidly growing among major global powers, including Russia, China, the United States, and France, for control and dominance in the African continent. This competition manifests in various forms, including economic engagement, political partnerships, and security cooperation. This influence based on who favors Africa's interests eats the giant cake of the benefits that comes with the partnership has created a stage of Africa welcoming a military stage of weapons and troops to come and show their power against various matters concerning wars and conflicts. As the Sahel and other African nations are expelling the West, The US and its Western counterparts are strengthening their military influence in other African nations, willing to welcome and also support their geopolitical interests. The fight for influence in Africa has never been more fierce compared to now, given that foreign forces are vying for military, political, and economic control, coupled with new political ideologies emerging in certain African countries, mostly in the Sahel. Experts reveal that ideological differences amongst major global powers have widened, with authoritarian governments such as China and Russia advocating alternative forms of government in opposition to liberal democracies. As China has been at the forefront of Africa's transformation, investing billions in infrastructure projects through its Belt and Road Initiative, Chinese-funded roads, railways, ports, and energy projects have reshaped African economies, providing much-needed development. The military deals China is having with various African nations may be overlooked, but growing rapidly. China has significantly increased its military presence and security cooperation in Africa. This includes providing military assistance, training, and equipment, as well as participating in joint military exercises and naval deployments. Africa has become a critical arena for China's military and security strategy beyond its border. The establishment of China's People's Liberation Army overseas base in Djibouti and the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, FOCAC, which includes 53 African countries, and being one of the first multilateral forums outside China's margin. This movement is significant on the African continent with deployments in Djibouti, approximately 2,000 Chinese troops, among others. Ever since the conflict in Libya in 2011, that saw the fall of an empire that had been created by Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, there has been an influx of weapons in the Sahel, often originating from conflict zones in Libya. These weapons have been smuggled through porous borders and vast, ungoverned spaces in countries such as Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, making it difficult for authorities to control. Hence, fueling the start of a new era of revolutionarists who changed the usual narrative of West Africa's geopolitics. The influx of these weapons fueling violent extremist organizations like Boko Haram, Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, and the Islamic State in the Greater Sahara. These groups use the weapons to conduct attacks, control territories, and intimidate local people. The real reason of the rise of these armed groups being complex, even involving accusing the West by revolutionarists led by President Ibrahim Traore and his colleagues in the Alliance of Sahel states. A new era of Africa's geopolitics had started. Russia's increased presence in the Sahel region, driven by a shift away from Western influence and a desire for security assistance, has significantly impacted the region's political and military landscape. This has manifested in several ways, including the deployment of Russian military personnel, arms shipments, and the embrace of military regimes by Russia. Russia has provided military support to the revolutionarists in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, including the deployment of Wagner Group mercenaries and GRU personnel, as well as the delivery of arms and equipment. Just recently, Russia has doubled down its focus on Africa's Sahel region, a troubled part of the continent that spreads roughly from Senegal to the Red Sea. Through the infamous Wagner mercenary group, now under Russia-Africa Corps, Moscow has won trust in Mali, Niger and Burkina Faso, plus Chad, and is taking advantage of Western policy missteps, growing anti-European sentiment, and long-standing failures of international and local actors to address the root causes of regional instability. Adding to Russia and China, Africa is experiencing a growing shift towards partnerships and investments from Eastern powers such as the Middle East and India as they seek alternative economic and political relationships beyond traditional Western influence. This shift is driven by a desire for economic development, infrastructure projects, and a diversification of political alliances. A number of Eastern nations are emerging rapidly developing nations, particularly in military technology. Their significance is prevailing as countries such as Turkey has created significant military partnerships, most especially its renowned Akinci and Bayraktar TB2 drones that have played a crucial part in the fight against insurgency. In recent years, African leaders have increasingly shifted their alliances from Western countries to China and Russia, among others seeking support in business, infrastructure, military training, and weaponry. As I said at first, that the African continent may seem underdeveloped on the outside, but the continent's value is crucial globally. As Eastern powers are spreading their influence in Africa, the West has not relaxed. Unfortunately, the traditional European colonial powers have either abandoned Africa or continue to treat it in a paternalistic way. Both the US and Europe attempt to nudge African governance towards specific values, making their support conditional on certain issues. The global competition for Africa's critical minerals, essential for clean energy technologies and other sectors, is intensifying. Superpowers like the US and China are actively courting African nations to secure access to these resources, leading to a complex interplay of geopolitical and economic factors. Africa's vast mineral reserves, including cobalt, lithium, and rare earth elements, are becoming strategic assets in the global race for technological dominance and energy security. The two blocs feel no way of leaving these minerals, a thing that is creating more tension.